The Bible has a lot to say about adultery, which is the act of having sexual relations with someone who is not your spouse. Adultery is considered a serious and grave sin in the Bible, and it is condemned in both the Old and New Testaments. The Old Testament, also known as the Hebrew Bible, contains several passages that condemn adultery. One of the most famous passages is the seventh commandment, which says, "You shall not commit adultery." Exodus chapter 20 verse 14. This commandment is part of the 10 Commandments, which God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. The book of Proverbs also has several verses that warn against adultery. Proverbs chapter 6 verses 32 to 33 says, "But a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself. Blows and disgrace are his lot, and his shame will never be wiped away." Proverbs chapter 7 verses 21 to 27 tells the story of a man who is seduced by a prostitute and warns against the dangers of giving in to temptation. The book of Hosea is a powerful example of how God views adultery. Hosea was a prophet who was told by God to marry a woman named Gomer, who was a prostitute. Despite Hosea's love for Gomer, she continued to be unfaithful to him, and she eventually left him to pursue other lovers. Despite her infidelity, God told Hosea to take Gomer back and to continue to love her, just as God continues to love his unfaithful people. The New Testament also contains several passages that condemn adultery. In Matthew chapter 5 verses 27 to 28, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus is saying that even if a person does not physically commit adultery, the desire to do so is still a sin. In John chapter 8 verses 1 to 11, we see an example of Jesus' attitude towards adultery. A group of people bring a woman to Jesus who was caught in the act of adultery. They ask Jesus what should be done with her, as the law of Moses commanded that adulterers be stoned to death. Jesus responds by saying, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." John chapter 8 verse 7. The people eventually leave, and Jesus tells the woman, "Go now and leave your life of sin." John chapter 8 verse 11. Why is adultery a sin? Adultery is a sin because it violates the sanctity of marriage. In the Bible, marriage is a sacred covenant between a man and a woman, and it is designed to be a lifelong commitment. When a person commits adultery, they break that covenant and betray the trust of their spouse. Adultery is also a sin because it is a form of sexual immorality, which is condemned in the Bible. Sexual immorality is any sexual activity outside of marriage, and it includes not only adultery but also premarital sex, homosexuality, and pornography. The consequences of committing adultery can be significant and can have lasting effects on individuals and relationships. Adultery can cause significant damage to a relationship, leading to mistrust, resentment, and hurt. It can be difficult for the betrayed partner to regain trust and feel safe in the relationship again. Adultery can cause emotional distress for both the person who committed the act and the betrayed partner. Feelings of guilt, shame, and remorse are common for the person who committed adultery, while the betrayed partner may experience feelings of anger, betrayal, and sadness. Depending on where you live, adultery may have legal consequences. For example, in some states, adultery can be used as a factor in divorce proceedings. Adultery can also have social consequences, leading to gossip, judgment, and condemnation from others. If the couple has children, adultery can have a significant impact on them. It can lead to family breakdown, emotional distress, and confusion for children. Adultery can also put individuals at risk of contracting sexually transmitted infections, STIs, or unwanted pregnancies. It is essential to recognize that every situation is different, and the consequences of adultery can vary depending on the circumstances. Ultimately, committing adultery can have significant emotional, social, and legal consequences that can be difficult to overcome.